Hey, what's up, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast by established church leaders for established church leaders. My name is Josh King.
My name is Sam, and he's back.
Bum, bum,
He's
bum.
back.
Rest in peace.
Micah is back. He didn't die, which is what we've been saying for all these episodes. I don't know if Micah ever tunes in, but on the rare chance that we would mention his name, we would say, "Rest in peace."
Rest in peace, because we knew you were resting from this show. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, I am significantly taller than Micah for the first time ever.
It's never happened before.
Yeah, the camera angles make Sam and I look like we're tall.
And I'm sitting down kind of in a chair, slumped down a little bit.
Hey, I'm slumped too, but I'm still taller. So, well, welcome back, Micah.
Hey, yeah, guys, I'm glad to be back.
Glad to have Micah back. For those of you who have not been listening since the very beginning, the show actually started with the three of us. Mm-hmm. And we are pausing EST. Doesn't mean we're going away. We're just pausing it for a season. Mm-hmm. And Josh and I are going to carry the conversation over to Rainer on Leadership. So if you have not subscribed to Rainer on Leadership, which is another podcast, we're going to go to 2 weekly episodes there. Josh and I will be doing all of the same things except over there. And we might bring back Micah at Rainer on Leadership. So
have we ever said, like, St. Louis, Missouri, Micah takes us to burgers, and then he's like, let's start a podcast. And that's how this whole thing was at a burger place in St. Louis, Missouri.
In St. Louis, Missouri. I forgot about that, Josh. I remember kind of having the idea originally, but I didn't remember that it was in St. Louis having burgers.
Then we sketched it out. I was thinking about American Eagle pants, like jeans, and how it always says established 19 whatever. And we were like, let's go with EST. And the rest is history. That's like a long time ago, 7 years or so. I don't.
Oh no,
it's more than that. It's 10. Like, I was going to say it's 9 or 10 years ago.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It was like 10 years ago when we developed the concept of EST and doing
a
podcast.
It's been a while.
Gracious.
Because if you remember, all three of us were established church pastors, and we're like, nobody's talking about this. Like everyone's doing church planting, which is great.
Yep.
And everyone's doing theology, which is great, but no one was doing established church leadership. So
I've been telling people we've been going for 7 years. Probably for the last 3 years, I've been telling everybody that. So
which is why,
about 10.
You know how, like, when you forget how old you are, and you're like,
So what we're hearing is, don't let Josh do your taxes. That's what we're hearing.
Do not. That would be a bad idea.
So anyway, we want to thank our sponsor, Church Teams. Boyd Pelly has been a good friend of the show. He's the co-founder over there, and he would love to serve you. So go check out Church Teams at churchteams.com. They are a church management software company, and if you have a church management software need, they have a solution. They do just about everything the best because they are the best. So churchteams.com is where you can learn more. And at a bare minimum, go sign up for their newsletter, because their newsletter has a ton of great content around technology, IT, church management software, and church leadership. And Boyd's often talking about things that nobody else is talking about. So you should go check him out at churchteams.com.
That's right. All right.
All right, Micah, give us an update.
Yep.
Where you been? Where you been all these years?
Well, I mean, I've actually been in the same spot. We're still living in the same house and everything, but obviously in a new role and gotten old. My hair's gotten a lot more gray. Maybe not as gray as Sam's has, though. Sam's got the whole silver fox thing going on, man.
Yeah.
Silver something. I don't know if I'm a fox. Yes.
In fact, 2 of my 3 kids are graduated from high school. One is married now, which is bananas. I've got a son-in-law. That's crazy. My youngest, Haddon, is in his junior year. So he's, we're 18 months away from being empty nest, which is
that's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. We're excited. Tracy and I are looking forward to having lots of fun, just the two of us hanging out together. So, and then vocationally, I work now with a collection of 4 nonprofits that all 4 are distinct. They all have their own boards. They all have their own budgets, but they work together under this umbrella called the Center for Public Faith. And the 4 orgs, one is called GlocalNet. It's the oldest organization, started by Bob Roberts. All 3 of us know Bob, and Bob is Bob's brilliant. Bob is fascinating to me. He's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. Reads voraciously and is also always has been sort of very engaged in ministry in sort of ways that are outside of the norm. And so started GlocalNet a few decades ago to do church planting. And through GlocalNet, we've seen between 200 and 300 churches planted. And we're still planting a bunch of churches every year. And so that's fantastic. And then we 25 years ago started an NGO out of North Vietnam called Global Ventures, GVI. And now we're actually just getting ready to start expanding GVI into multiple other countries, which is exciting. So it's how we take Christians to do humanitarian work around the globe, which is really exciting. And then about a year ago, we were given a third organization called the Institute for Global Engagement. Now, IGE has been around for a couple of decades, but we took over ownership of the organization a year ago. It's one of the premier Christian organizations related to religious freedom in the world, based out of DC. It was started by Robert Seipel, who was the very first international ambassador at large for international religious freedom when that position was established. And then when he left, he established the Institute for Global Engagement. And now we took over ownership and leadership of IGE. And then the fourth organization is actually not a Christian organization per se. It's called the Multi-Faith Neighbors Network. It's a peacemaking organization that works predominantly with people from the Abrahamic faith tradition, so Muslim, Christian, Jewish. And that's what I spend most of my time on, is that organization. I lead that organization. I oversee the staff and our programs. And it freaks people out because it's not your typical evangelical pastor type work. And I'll tell you more about that here in just a little bit. But yeah, I spend most of my time, I work from home, but most of my time is on the road. In the last month, I've been in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and Washington, D.C. and Chicago. All of our offices are in D.C. We just opened our new headquarters a few months ago. It's just one block from the White House in downtown D.C. And so everything we do is related to how Christians how they embody and live out their faith in the public square, which I don't think we do a very good job of, but that's sort of how we live out our calling.
So for everyone that's been missing Micah and wondering what he's been up to, he's been conquering the world.
Yeah.
Slowly trying.
Remember the old Pinky and the Brain episodes?
Mm-hmm. What do we do? Same thing we do every night, Pinky.
Same thing we do all the time.
Somebody asked me,
let's take over the world.
They asked me what I did, and I was like, well, we go around the world, we work with clerics, we work with governments, we work with ambassadors and State Department. In the U.S., we work with Homeland Security and the White House and the State Department. And we do this work. And they said, so you tell me you're working for the CIA. I said, no, I'm not working for the CIA. They said, that's exactly what you would tell me if you were working for the CIA.
Yeah,
I said, yeah, I promise I'm really not working. Nobody with this body would be hired to work for the CIA. Not in good enough shape. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it is fascinating work. It's at the intersection of faith and government. And so I get to spend a lot of my time with pastors, but also religious leaders from other faiths. And then I spend a lot of time with government leaders.
So you are at the intersection of faith or multiple faiths, government, yes, and the local church in the United States.
Yep.
So at that intersection where you're directing traffic, what would you say is like the biggest issue that you face with this role?
Well, I would say let's talk about it from the Christian church perspective, and it's basically this: that evangelical Christians in the U.S. have very little engagement with people who are outside of our basically Christian sphere, and the data supports it. I can show you some fascinating data that took the entire U.S. population and broke it up by religious demographic, including those who have no religious affiliation or identity. And when you look at every single religious demographic in the U.S., the demographic that has the least amount of relationships with the Muslim community, for instance, are white evangelicals. It's the three of us on this call, and so and then the only way in which we do have engagement with people is if it is an explicitly evangelistic opportunity. I'm going to only engage with somebody who's different than me if it's for the express purpose of me being able to help them come to Christ. And then if they choose not to come to Christ, I'll move on to the next person. And probably not shockingly to anyone, that's a very ineffective way to go about sharing your faith and seeing people embrace your faith. Not to mention, I think from a theological perspective, it's inconsistent with who Jesus calls us to be as followers of Christ in the public sphere. And in fact, shortly after I came to MFNN, I worked with Bob Roberts, who heads all of the 4 organizations, and a pastor that I think both of you guys know. Josh, I know you know him pretty well, Steve Besner. And the 3 of us, and Bez works in multi-faith with me a lot. And we wrote a Christian theology of multi-faith. We wanted to help pastors understand that what we're doing is not inconsistent with theological orthodox evangelical theology, but in fact it's driven by it, and also to distinguish between multi-faith, which is what we do, and classic interfaith, which a lot of people are fearful of, and I think maybe rightly so, depending on how that works itself out.
Yeah, this is like a whole new world for me, to quote the Disney movie. And I would imagine that a lot of our listeners like, okay, wow, Micah's doing some really big stuff. That sounds like, like this massive thing. Like we're going to bridge a lot of people that would otherwise be at odds with each other. So
yeah, and I think
walk me through that. Like,
yeah,
how does that work practically at ground level?
Let's say that I would start by saying there is this assumption from a lot of Christians that in order to do this, we have to sacrifice theological conviction. Because, and again, this is the sort of perception of modern interfaith engagement, is that a couple of things are at play. Either one, we're sacrificing theological conviction, or 2, we tend to be really kind of liberal progressive, and we fundamentally just believe that, we have different ways of getting there, but we're all kind of in the same camp.
Pluralism or universalism.
Yeah. And I would actually say an accurate definition of pluralism means multiple faiths present in the same space, but not a melding together of those. Right. And so I think pluralism is a good thing. Universalism is a bad thing. I think that's your point.
I would say that's the classic definition, but that's not how it's often used today.
That's exactly right. And what we're trying to do is help people understand we do live in a pluralistic environment. It's going to be more pluralistic in the future. It's not going to be less pluralistic in the future. The demographic trends are very clear in that regard. And so the question we have to ask is, how do we function in that space? How do I, as a conservative, Orthodox, evangelical, how do I function as a person of deep faith and conviction, living out those principles, living out my theology, but in a way where I can still be in relationship and partnership with people who are very different than me? And so that's what we do. And one of the things that's unique about our organization is that we're the only organization that I'm aware of. Well, that's not accurate. We're one of the only organizations I'm aware of nationally that does this work that is specifically targeting evangelical Christians to be involved. And it's largely because evangelicals are not in this space, which is tragic to me.
It's dominated by the progressives.
It is dominated by the liberal progressive movement on the Christian side, or Catholic and Orthodox Christians, sometimes who are conservative, but they tend to be more dominant in this space. And then, but it's also not just Christians that this is dominated by more liberal progressive spaces, groups. Among Jewish and Muslim communities, it tends to be more liberal progressive elements of those that are there. And it's because so many of them think, well, I can't be myself. I can't theologically bring my entire self into the room. Man, I'm just telling you, we found that not to be the case. I can walk into a room with people who believe things that are diametrically opposed to what I believe. We would say that we have irreconcilable theological beliefs at points. And yet I can be honest about who I am. But a lot of this is rooted in getting our theology right. And so, for instance, I think most of us have been taught as evangelicals, when we see a person, we start with the idea that they're a sinner, right? I believe theologically every person is a sinner. I believe theologically that every person is in need of a savior, and that Jesus is the only way. But I think theologically, what predates the fact that every person is a sinner is the idea that every person is made in the image of God. That comes first in the canon, right? And then comes the idea that all people are in sin. There's a reason why I think we start with the idea that every person is made in the image of God, because it helps us to recognize that every person has inherent value, worth, and dignity, that they're loved by God, and that I can view them as a person of worth, value, and dignity and not have to view them with sort of cynicism or skepticism. That doesn't negate the fact that I think every person is a sinner, that every person is in need of a savior, that Jesus is the only way. I can believe all of those things. But I start with this idea of the image of God as the founding point of my relationships with them. And so I say to my friends all the time who disagree with me, and I spend 85% of my time now with non-Christians, and I love it. It's fantastic. And I say to them regularly, here's what I believe. I share my faith more now than I've ever shared it in my life. And I say to them, I want you to believe in Jesus. I'll baptize you right now. We'll find a spot and we'll go baptize you right now. But if you don't choose to follow Jesus, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to desire to be in relationship with you. You're not a project for me. I'm not just trying to, get you to agree with me and then, move on to the next person. I want to genuinely love people. And if you can start with this idea that every person is made in the image of God, and then if you can have a robust theology of the kingdom of God and recognize that in a kingdom theology, there is more to the Christian life. Kingdom theology is never less than verbally sharing our faith and inviting people to believe in Jesus, but it is more than that, right? A kingdom theology would help us to understand that everything we do is a reflection of how our position in the kingdom and how we think about God. And so we're going to live out that faith in the way that we're a neighbor to people who may believe differently than us, or how we serve on the school PTA with people who maybe have different views than we do, how we're going to live out that faith in the public square. And so I just fear that we have boiled down our relationship with people who are different than us to such a small point where basically it's transactional to, if I can't get you saved, then I don't really have a whole lot of use for you. And I can just tell you, the vast majority of Muslims and Jews that I engage with on a regular basis do not believe that Christians love them. The vast, vast majority. It's not close. And I've had a couple people tell me, I thought I had a Christian friend, but when I told them I wasn't following Jesus, I never heard from them again. And I realized I was just their project. I wasn't really their friend. So and that's tragic.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you say you're working primarily with these evangelicals, what is it that you're inviting them into actually do? Are these projects, are not the person's a project, but are you working on projects together, or is there conversations? What's that look like?
Yeah, we are working on projects together. So we host these retreats. I just did one in Chicago last week. We host these retreats where we bring imams and pastors and rabbis together in the same space for about 2 days. We put them in a hotel or a conference center or something. And there's a couple of lectures, but by and large, the activities revolve around collaboration together, understanding one another. They do pretty deep, in-depth interviews with one another. And then part of what we do that makes our organization unique, and we've had a lot of folks who have historically worked in interfaith who get excited about our work, because we break the groups up by faith, and we do an exercise called perceptions and expectations, for instance. We say, okay, if you're a Christian, what do you believe to be true about the Muslim community? What does your community believe to be true about the Jewish community? And then what do you think they believe about you? What's your perception of the Jewish community's view of Christians and the Muslim community's view of Christians? And then they have to present this in front of the whole group. Man, I'm telling you, that's a fascinating exercise. It gets biases out on the table. It gets rumors out on the table, innuendo out on the table. Sometimes what they say is true and it gets out on the table. And it always gets a little bit tense and a little bit painful. But when we do this, what we're able to do is we're able to build genuine, authentic friendships, relationships between people of deep difference. And I think that's incredibly important, for one, just to have a healthy, functioning society. We have to be in relationship where we can work together with people of deep difference. But two, as an evangelical who wants to embody the person of Jesus and wants to share that faith with others, I think I have to do that in the context of relationships. Coming out of the retreats, we ask them to partner together with a rabbi, a pastor, and an imam and their congregations, and then do some sort of project in the community. Not a project that would sacrifice their theological confession at all, but could they plant a garden together? Could they help work to care for homeless together? Could they work for underprivileged children together? What's something that they could do that doesn't require any sort of theological sacrifice or any sort of convictional compromise, but allows them to get to know one another in the context of working side by side? So actually, Besner is a good example of this in Houston. His church donated some land, and they put a fence around it, and the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities now farm this 1 or 2 acre plot all year long. And they've been doing it. I think they're in the end of their second year now. And then all the fresh vegetables and fresh food that is harvested off this plot is sent to a distribution center in Houston, and it feeds a food desert in downtown urban Houston. Well, that requires no theological compromise. You can do that. You can do that all day with everybody. And they've built deep relationships between the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities. So Bez was telling me, for instance, the other day on Easter, the rabbi and his son showed up at their church just to come visit on an Easter Sunday because he calls Steve his pastor now because he's begun to build relationships with Steve. He found out that Steve loves him and that Steve cares about him, that sort of thing. And so what we're trying to do, this is really, it sounds like a big thing, but it's really a small thing. It's just how do we help people build relationships with their neighbors that we normally don't know, that we normally just don't engage with. And what I found is that if you're a minority in the US, if you're a religious minority or an ethnic minority, you know how to engage with people who are not like you because that's all you do all the time. If you're the majority, so you guys and me, if you're a white evangelical, you can go forever and basically never have to really engage in depth anybody who's not like you. And so for us, when we're working in the US, it's helping the evangelical community adjust to this sort of reality of engaging with the minority communities that's tough. When I'm overseas in a Muslim majority context doing this, it's the opposite. I'm helping the Muslim majority help them understand what it's like to be a minority in their context and how they need to advocate for religious liberty among, whatever community they happen to be working in, that sort of thing.
So let me ask a practical question. We'll close with this, and then we'll carry it over to the next episode next week. So stay tuned in. Practically, just a real practical question. Let's say that you're in a community and there are plans for a mosque to be built right down the road from your church. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a Baptist, a classic Baptist in the Leland Williams type of free church and a free land. I believe we're a Christian nation, but at the same time, I also believe that people should be free to worship as they so choose. Baptists are responsible for religious liberty in the United States. You've heard me say that before on the show.
Shocking.
But you can imagine the uproar in your congregation if there's a mosque that, planned to be built. They go through the zoning requirements, whatever, and it gets to the city council and there's a bit of a stink. What do you tell your congregation? Or let's say somebody comes up to you, a deacon, and says, hey, I don't really want to be hurtful to anybody, but I don't want a mosque down the road from my church. What do you tell that person?
So this was a reality for me when I pastored in St. Joseph, Missouri, because there was a mosque being built in our town. That's literally the exact issue that got me involved in multi-faith, is our people, some of them were not responding well to this new mosque being built in town. And I didn't know how to pastor them well through it. How do I pastor them so that they can live out their faith, be honest about their faith, but also love their neighbors well? Let me say a few things. First, in terms of religious liberty, you guys know who Obadiah Holmes is? Sam, I'm pretty sure you'll know who Obadiah Holmes is. Josh is shaking his head. Josh, we got to send you back to Baptist history class.
Oh, man. He took you have beat me as with roses.
Yes. Well, I just learned a couple months ago, he's my grandfather 11 generations back. I did not know that. I've been doing a pretty deep dive on my family tree, and I found out he's my direct grandfather about 11 generations back. Yeah. So
everyone loves the Puritans, but they were kind of stinky people, to be real.
The Obadiah Holmes and John Leland and Roger Smith. I mean, these guys, laid the whole foundation for religious freedom in the U.S. So I would say this, first of all, faith that is not freely chosen is not authentic faith, right? For our faith to be authentic, we have to be able to freely choose that faith.
Forced worship stinks in the nostrils of God.
That's exactly right.
I think that was Williams.
That means that we have to advocate for religious freedom. And that means that we have to give space for people who believe differently than we are believing to exist. There's a movement right now with respect to Christian nationalism in the U.S. where they're trying to resist that and push back against that. I think that's anathema. I think it's not Christian. I think it's not
American. It's just not even American.
It's just wrong in so many ways. So number one, I would say if a mosque is being built, I can advocate for their right to build the mosque, defend that right without having to agree with Islam. And there is a chapter I want to encourage you guys. I'm really good at writing books that no one reads, and so if you want to write a book that no one read, Keith Whitfield and I co-edited a book called Islam in North America, and there is a chapter in that book on religious liberty, and it's specifically related to this question: if a mosque is being built in your town, how do you respond to it? And it was written by Bart Barber, and it is one of the best modern contemporary treatments I've found on the issue of religious freedom. And I would say, as Christians who want to spread our faith, that has to happen in the context of people being free to choose their faith. And in order for that to happen, we have to advocate for religious liberty and advocate for the right for everyone to practice their faith. And that can live at the same time, simultaneously, that can live with a deep conviction that my faith is the one true faith. And I don't have to sacrifice the two. Let me give you a real-time example story that I can illustrate how this works its way out in our work. And then I know we got to wrap up. We were doing one of these retreats in Pakistan. We do these retreats all over the world. And in the middle of the retreat, some pastors stood up and said, we've got to be honest, we've not been able to worship recently in our church because extremists attacked our people, burned the church to the ground, and we've been physically unavailable. We just can't go. Our people are at risk. They said this in the retreat with the imams and the pastors all in the room. One of the most prominent imams in Pakistan stood up and said, this is wrong. It's inconsistent with the way I understand my faith. But he said, here's my commitment to you. I own land next to my home, and I'm going to give that land to the evangelical church, and I'm going to help you build your church on my land. And I don't agree with Christianity, and I think you guys are wrong theologically, but you have to be able to practice your faith freely. And if your church is built on my land, you'll have my protection. Nobody will bother you on that land. Well, that's exactly what they were able to do, begin to build a church. Now, that's Muslims advocating for a Christian to be able to worship freely in a place where it's kind of tough for Christians to sometimes do that. We want to be able to do the same thing. And that happened in Phoenix. We had some people threatening a mosque with guns, open carrying like AK-47s, threatening the Muslims from being able to go in on a Friday during Jummah prayer and pray. And some of the Christians that we work with formed a ring around the mosque and said, we don't have to agree with Islam to say these folks have a right to practice their faith, and they protected them when they went in to practice their faith. Now, I know not a lot, but I know some Christians who might get upset about that. And I would say that that's exactly what our forefathers, particularly our Baptist forefathers, the kind of work they were advocating for when they advocated for religious freedom in the first place.
Good stuff. Hey, we're going to carry this conversation over into the next episode, so you'll have to wait till next week to hear the rest of it. Mm-hmm. Micah's been gone so long. He's got so many words. So many stuff to say.
Mm-hmm. Lots of words.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much for listening this week. We hope that you will check out our sponsors, Church Teams, and that you will stay tuned next week as we have Micah back on. Also, don't forget to go ahead and subscribe to Rainer on Leadership as we move the EST conversation over to Rainer on Leadership. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.